say, no, feminism is not, that is not biblical. That's not scriptural. Because God says that the man is the head of the family and he is the blah, 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 and then you would see all the little diagrams that here's God, and then here's the woman underneath that, and then the children are underneath the women. And, they just had it all worked out. And that was probably 11 years old, somewhere around there, 10 or 11 years old, that I started to kind of, just kind of ask those types of questions. Like, okay, now what's the deal? Like, y'all seem to be kind of going at crossways with the rest of the world. And why do you feel differently? So I just, as a kid, you just kind of take people at their word. You just try to, you try to be agreeable. That was a lot of what was instilled in us, is just, get in line. You just fall in line and do what you have to do to fit in. And so it was always in the back of my mind. It was always just kind of like, y'all are kind of making this up as you go along. Something about it is just not quite adding up.
Yeah, the examples you gave there, for those of you who aren't familiar with this, I know what we're talking about with the umbrellas. You have this chart, and on top is this really big umbrella, and it's God, and then underneath it is a smaller umbrella that's the man, and then under that is a smaller umbrella still, that's the woman, and then under that is the children. And that diagram was always interesting to me because it fundamentally misunderstands how umbrellas work. Because after the first umbrella, you do not need any other umbrellas. Like the only way that makes sense is if there's a really shitty umbrella on top. So like you're kind of like, it was always very weird to me. It was just really strange, but it's like, I don't know. It was always weird. And you were talking about how this is a great point too. I like that you brought up when you asked, "Are you a feminist?" Because even today, people misunderstand what the word feminist means, and that if you're a feminist, that you must have some sort of deep-seated animosity towards everyone with a Y chromosome and stuff like that. And it's like, no, that's not. But even so, even like the actual definition, they would probably buck against. And it's fascinating to me because I remember back in those days, whenever that was, the 90s, 2000s or whatever, you would always hear these people refer to feminists as feminazis. They did it all the time. Yeah. And now these are the same people today who are just enraged that anyone has the temerity to refer to them as a Nazi. When you guys have spent decades referring to feminists as Nazis, they've had no problem with that at all. And I remember you mentioned having conversations about, women's role in church or whatever. I remember my pastor once, we had a special service like set aside talking about this very issue and about women's role in church. And, they referred to the verse in Paul saying that, the verse that Paul said that women should be, shouldn't take authority over men. They should adorn themselves with shamefacedness and sobriety. Mm-hmm. And anyway, the pastor, I don't know if you ever heard this argument. He said that, men and women are equal, but we have different positions that we're supposed to fill within the church. And he mentioned how, King David was a great man of God, but God wouldn't allow David to build the temple because he was a man of war, and how certain people weren't allowed to go in the temple, And so, there's just different rules. And we had a guy in our church stand up, and he said, so the actual Greek word here is for the position of the woman. It literally translates to stand under. Like that's what it actually means. And so my position is that women actually are inferior to it. That's basically what he said out loud. And it got kind of awkward in the church, but especially like, thank you for that. And then it's kind of went on and everything. So they kind of paint themselves in the corners with this stuff. But if it weren't so tragic and so like harmful to people, it would be pretty funny to think about all this stuff.
Yeah. It's amazing what's justified in some of these services. I mean, I couldn't even possibly begin to recall the number of times that I've heard just silly, weird revelation moments like that, where either a pastor had pre-planned something, or like I said, just somebody blurted something out in a Bible study or some casual setting where you're just like, it's just like crickets. And because for us being in kind of an independent church, there's no governing body to say, hey, this is wacky. Like, no, that's not going to fly. It just all had to do with the revelation of that specific body, that group of people, that pastor, and then whoever was sitting up underneath him. So yeah, there were some wacky theologies that would get through. And the cool thing for us is that we were constantly being taken out of certain environments and placed in others. And whether it was My father worked for a lot of churches that were majority white. He worked for some that were kind of mixed, and he worked for one or two that were, these large ministries that were, some of them were Black, one or two were Black. But we could all, I think that kind of helped with my sense of like perception and perspective and scrutiny, I guess, because we could never get too fully entrenched in one environment and never too fully indoctrinated, I guess, into a specific set of beliefs, because it was like as soon as we did, it'd be a year or two, we'd be at a church and he would pull us out and he would take us somewhere else, to Spokane, Washington, or Detroit, Michigan, or New Jersey, or wherever, Baltimore. And then they would kind of, again, these are independent churches. And so just according to whatever the pastor's particular revelations were about the Bible and whatever, then they would kind of have their own set of rules. So it did kind of pull the curtain back just a little bit, in a sense, that caused you to see a bit of the artifice and a bit of the construct that went into creating and building these worlds. Because it's like, well, you all kind of have your own set of rules. Like, y'all feel like if folks are not praying in tongues and shouting and dancing, like they're literally not going to heaven. Whereas in this other environment, this is all kind of optional, and just a lot of little rules and regulations that probably most people wouldn't care about unless they grew up in those environments. But it was all so dire to a lot of them. It was like, this is really heaven and hell stuff.
Yeah.
And you go to another environment and it's not. So, well, what does that say?
So that's it. So that's interesting. So my family moved around a few times. My dad was in the Army, and we went to a few different churches, but they all kind of believe the same thing. But I guess that's just selection bias. If you select for a church that believes in the same thing, you're going to keep getting the same results. But you said that you went to different ones, and that's a wide swing of doctrine there. I've never really run across that too often, where a person went to a bunch of different churches that, relied heavily on certain things. So I should explain for anyone who doesn't know that she mentioned how these churches were independent, and what she literally means that is that these independent churches say what?
Said anyone could start them. There was no one telling
there's no like Presbyterian structure or whatever, like or like an ecclesiastical authority to kind of keep people in line. Like just any asshole can go up there and start this church and say whatever he wants, and it will be a he say whatever he wants, and kind of craft it, and you essentially create this little fiefdom where the pastor's interpretation of the Bible, if he's charismatic enough, can get people to go along with it, and it sets up a lot of obvious problems, a lot with sexism, racism, and it creates this environment of abuse just waiting to happen, because people don't know anything about the outside world, and they keep you in this little enclave.